Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts project at thunderbolts.info. Today, comparative mythologist Ev Cochrane continues his series on his lifelong research into the themes and archetypes of world mythology. In previous discussions, Cochrane has explored the extraordinary identities of planets in myth, including Mars as the warrior hero, and Venus, among other identities, as the mother goddess, the great comet, and a fire-breathing serpent. The reconstruction that Cochrane and colleague David Talbott have produced leaves none of the global archetypes unaddressed. Archetypes which could only exist as a result of real celestial events witnessed and experienced by ancient peoples. Previously, Ev presented his investigation into ancient Egyptian traditions, which describe the sun appearing atop a lotus flower at the time of creation. According to both Talbott and Cochrane, such traditions describe a particular phase in the history of the polar configuration, one in which Mars, as Horus, was positioned in front of Venus, as the lotus flower. In this episode, Ev continues his discussion on the lotus flower in myth, a symbol improbably linked to the sun gods of various cultures.
A familiar image in ancient Egyptian iconography finds the Horus child seated atop a lotus flower. According to Ev Cochrane, the dean of Egyptologists, the sun god on a lotus blossom was an image of the first emergence of shapes at the creation. James Allen offered a very similar summary of this fascinating thematic pattern, noting it was from this flower that the sun could blossom into the world. Why an infant sitting atop a lotus should be an archetypal symbol of creation is rarely addressed and is yet to receive a satisfactory answer. Predictably, Egyptologists identify the Horus child with the present sun, but they essentially ignore the fundamental role of the lotus. At no point do they ever seriously address the elephant in the room, namely, where in all of heaven is a lotus flower to be found in the immediate vicinity of the present sun? The motif is attested in other cultures as well. In ancient India, for example, we read that the world lotus originally blooms in response to the rising of the sun in the beginning. Here, as in ancient Egypt, the blossoming of the lotus is explicitly placed at the time of beginning. In other words, creation. Analogous traditions are evident in Mesoamerica, where the sacred Mayan text known as the Book of Chilambalam describes the sun as residing within a four-petaled flower. Fourfold was the plate of the flower, and the sun was set in its center. So too in the hieroglyphic Mayan script, the sun is depicted as a four-petaled flower. The Mayan sun sign, in turn, finds a remarkable analog in ancient Mesopotamia, where the sun was represented as a four-petaled flower. To bring the argument full circle, this particular image forms a close structural parallel to the Egyptian WMB flower, described as follows. The WMB flower is none other than the primordial lotus from which the sun emerges at dawn in the east.
We see many examples of similar imagery in ancient artworks and religious iconography from around the world. We asked Ev how one might distinguish between depictions of four-petaled flowers, which can be explained in familiar terms, versus depictions of celestial phenomena.
Naturally, it's important to pay careful attention to context. In prehistoric artworks such as those from the famous passage tombs at Loughcrew, Ireland, four-petaled flower-like forms appear alongside a wide variety of suns and starbursts, a sure indication that celestial forms are being depicted. So too in Mesopotamia, four-petaled flowers are routinely depicted in conjunction with a recumbent crescent and alongside four rayed stars, thereby confirming their fundamental affinity. Equally important is the fact that the so-called Ra sign also appears in conjunction with a recumbent crescent. All modern scholars, except for Talbott and myself, accept that the image depicted in Figure 6 is that of the present sun.
If we grant that the four-petaled floral forms are celestial in nature, how can we rule out the conventional view that the present sun is being depicted?
A systematic analysis of the respective artworks and mythological traditions will inevitably point to a catastrophic context for the archetypal theme of the blossoming sun. The myths of various cultures, for example, make the central heart of this or that god suddenly blossom into a sun amidst great fireworks. It is this cataclysmic background that alone can explain the otherwise anomalous fact whereby in numerous ancient languages, words for to blossom or to flower also denote fire. The Greek word anthos, for example, denotes flower, but also the fire stolen by Prometheus. The same linguistic connection is found in the New World, especially among the Aztecs, where words for to flower also mean fire. Witness the following finding offered by the anthropologist Jane Hill, quote, "The metaphoric association of flowers and flames is very widespread in Aztecan languages. The metaphor of the blooming flower as bursting into flame can be reconstructed as a lexical item meaning blossom, bloom for Aztecan."
Given the striking association between flowers and fire in ancient testimony, we asked Ev how it can be explained in terms of natural science.
The Aztec myth of creation provides the all-important clue. There, a scab-laden nobody named Nanahuatl hurls himself into a great funeral pyre, whereupon he's enveloped in fire and suddenly blossoms while becoming transfigured into the sun. While this is a singularly informative mythological tradition, analogous traditions will be found around the globe. Heracles' fiery death within the funeral pyre atop Mount Eta offers a familiar example. Such archaic mythological traditions preserve remarkably accurate memories of extraordinary planetary events of a catastrophic nature, the likes of which are virtually impossible to imagine today, events which profoundly shaped the course of ancient civilization. At our last EU conference in Phoenix, I presented a number of slides that are particularly compelling. Witness the image presented in Figure 7, dating from about 3000 BC. It depicts a four-petaled rosette with what appear to be four dots or points of light between the petals. As I have documented, analogous images will be found around the globe, typically in celestial contexts. In many examples, the four-petaled flower is replaced by a four-rayed star, as in Figures 8 from Mesopotamia and Figure 9 from Mesoamerica. Students of archaeoastronomy will recognize the latter image as the Lamont sign, widely acknowledged to have something to do with the planet Venus. Granted that such images depict celestial forms, and it is quite impossible to believe otherwise, the question is how to explain the four dots between the rays of the central star. Readers who are familiar with Tony Perrot's plasma experiments will immediately recognize these dots as a classic signature of synchrotron radiation, as documented in the high-energy discharge experiments conducted by him. This is but one of many clues, albeit a particularly important one, pointing to the incredibly powerful electromagnetic forces associated with the polar configuration as witnessed by ancient sky watchers around the globe.